Hey, it's Pastor John here from Coram Church. As some of you know, we invite people on Sundays to text their questions in, and then during the week we release a video response. And so it helps us to know what things you're curious about or confused about or interested in. And so hopefully these answers are helpful to you. So I'm going to go ahead and address one of the questions we got recently. It says, was Paul, meaning the Apostle Paul who wrote most or about half of the New Testament, was Paul certain of his election, and how can a believer be certain of their own election? So great questions and definitely weighty issues to be dealing with. Just briefly, I would say all indications from Paul's letters are that he was certain that he was a sinner. He was certain that Christ had come into the world to save sinners, and that God had shown him mercy and grace. And so I would say all indications from his writings are that Paul was both aware of his sin. So in Romans 7, he's talking about that he does the things he doesn't want to do, and the things he wants to do he doesn't do. So he's aware of his need, he's aware of his sin, and yet he's also clearly aware of the gospel, that God made him, Christ, who knew no sin, to be sin for us so that we might become the righteousness of God. That it's central to Paul's understanding of the gospel, that the salvation is by the work of Christ, not by our work, and we grab onto that work through faith in Christ. And so Paul's abundantly clear of that, and throughout his letters seems quite certain that he has been called. He's an apostle of Jesus Christ by the command of God. This is common language for him, so he seems to be certain of that. The second part of the question is, how can a believer be certain of their own election? And it depends on what you mean by certain. Paul himself tells us to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, which means that we never have I'm in, I'm fine, it's all good. There doesn't seem to be that that type of an attitude towards our own sin and towards the gospel, but rather we're instructed by Paul to work this out with fear and trembling. This is a very serious issue. This is about eternity and the glory of God in heaven, and so those things should never be taken lightly, nor should they be taken for granted. And at the same time, there's two things that we're always looking at to make sure that we belong to God, that we're saved. And so the first thing is are we believing the gospel? If I'm elect, if I'm called, and I want to know that, the first thing I'm going to do is look at, am I believing the gospel? Do I believe that Jesus came in the flesh, that he was crucified on the cross in my place for my sins, that Christ received what I deserve in terms of punishment, and I have received by faith what Christ deserved, which is to be a son of God, to belong to God, to have the inheritance of heaven, to have the righteousness of God through Christ. Do I believe the gospel? So that's the first thing. And then if we answer yes, we believe the gospel, then the second question would be, is belief in that gospel expressing itself through obedience and through a changed life? So the first thing is, do you believe the gospel? Okay, if we mark yes on that, then the second question is that gospel changing me? So the book of James says that faith without works is dead, meaning that if there's no transformation of life and desires and thoughts, that there's no authentic faith in place. Jesus said that he was the vine and that we were the branches, and if we remain in him and he in us, we will bear much fruit, and apart from him we can do nothing. So again, if we're in him by faith, then he is in us, and that will be bearing fruit. In 1 John, it says that if we claim to know him and we don't do what he says, that we're not obedient, then we're lying and we are deceptive. And 2 Peter, chapter 1 verse 10, Peter tells us, make sure of our election and make sure of our calling. And the way that we do that is by looking to see, is there evidence, is there fruit? The book of Galatians talks about fruit of the Spirit. So the two things that you want to look at in this order, it's important to get the order right. to know that we really belong to God is, do we believe the gospel? Do we believe what God has said? Second thing, is our belief in Christ leading to a transformation of life? And sometimes the transformation of life is going to be really, really slow, and so the question is going to be, oh, am I really saved? And then you want to go back to, do I believe? Do I believe the gospel? Then is that belief changing me? Because if it's authentic belief, it will change, and if it's authentic belief, it will endure. And so you, excuse me, you want to look at faith in the gospel, and you want to see fruit, and you keep going back to that, and as we're learning more deeply what the gospel is, and the depth of God's love for us demonstrated in Christ, that is going to increasingly produce the fruit of obedience. And Paul, in Colossians, talks about if you continue, and so there is a tension to this in which if we say, I believed in fifth grade and I raised my hand and I said a prayer or something and my life hasn't been changed at all, then you should be concerned about your salvation. If you believe and you're hitting a tough road, and you can go, no, you can look back at your life and say, no, I believe, and there's been maybe small incremental growth, then you should be encouraged. But we're always dealing with it in fear and trembling, realizing that this is a weighty issue that we don't want to be ignorant about. So I hope that's helpful for you. As always, you can reply to these video posts or email more questions, and I'll do my best to respond. All right, take care.